for those that are watching on Facebook and I haven't met before, my name is Michael Goldberg, and I am the Executive Director of the Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship here at Case, where I also am an Associate Professor at the Business School, teaching mostly classes on entrepreneurship. It's great to have you here today, and Gerald, welcome back to campus via Zoom, which is, since none of us are on campus. So it's really great to have the diversity of alums share experiences with us. My own background actually and Andrew, we were just chatting with some of the participants before. Andrew we were discussing some of the work he's doing around voting rights here in the US, and his son was in Johannesburg. My first job out of university was actually living in South Africa. So I lived in South Africa for 3 years, working for a USAID contractor on South Africa's first democratic elections. Actually, there's mine. And I don't even have my fake backgrounds up today. I have my real backgrounds. There's me and Mandela from 1991, a few years ago. And then I worked on projects for the South African elections. So I have a little bit of experience in the parts of the world, although not in West Africa, mostly in Southern Africa. And then speaking of South Africa, Michael Volkening, who is one of our great undergrad Case Western Reserve University students, came into my office, it's probably about a year ago, right, Michael?
Yeah, about a year.
And I think the conversation started around interested in entrepreneurship and fintech. And before it was all said and done, Michael got on a plane to go to Cape Town to work with a social entrepreneur in Cape Town. And actually, John, he's from Illinois, so in the Illinois connection, after kind of growing up. And you could tell a little bit about your background, Michael, and how you ended up in South Africa before you introduced Gerald. So one of the things that we try to do for these sessions, which is great, is having them be student moderated. So when I knew Gerald was going to join in his background, I was excited to have Michael join. So Michael, let me turn it over to you. For anybody on Facebook Live, and for John and Andrew, and I know we're going to be adding some more people in, you can either, because we have a small group, either raise your hand if you want Michael to call on you. You can put a question in the chat, but hopefully this will be a great kind of small, informal back and forth. And I will turn it over to Michael to moderate.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Michael Volkening. I'm a junior finance major here at Case. As Michael mentioned, I did go to South Africa last summer. It definitely allowed me to dive right into entrepreneurship and push me outside my comfort zone. And I learned things that I never thought I'd learn. So as he mentioned, I'm going to be the moderator today. We're going to start off by, Gerald, I don't know, do you want to introduce yourself, or would you like me to sort of give an introduction for you?
Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, this is Gerald. Him and I actually had a conversation about a week ago. I think we spoke for about an hour to an hour and a half. He's an extremely interesting guy. He actually graduated from Ohio State. He then went on to he went to Case, got his master's degree. He's held many roles. He's worked for Johnson & Johnson, General Electric. Right now he's actually working for Grand Light, which is a manufacturer of lighting fixtures. He holds a pretty prominent role there in the company as well. And in doing this, he also has started his own sort of supply chain company that is sort of based in Nigeria, and he runs it from the United States. So Gerald.
Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. I find it very fortunate to be your guest at the event discussion today. And as Michael introduced me, I wear multiple hats. However, I will spend the majority of my time shedding some light on what we're doing in Nigeria, as well as some of my background on how we, before we arrived in Nigeria. I actually was born and raised in Nigeria, and spent the first 17 years of my life living in a state in Edo State. For those of you who aren't familiar with the country, and I grew up under conditions where there was a lot of uncertainty about electricity. Electricity, which we have here in the States today in overabundance, was something that wasn't a common occurrence in Nigeria. So I grew up and went to school, and with the expectation that when I got home from school, when I was in middle school, that there'd most likely be no light, and I had to utilize whatever was left of sunlight that particular day or weekday to do all of my work I needed to get done and get ready for the next day's lessons. Because once it got dark and there was no light, there was no power, we had a limited amount of kerosene-powered lanterns in the home to conduct all activities in the home with. So this is one example of one of the conditions in which I was raised, and it kind of honed my expectation or what to expect in life and how I think about problems and solve challenges that I'm faced with wherever I find myself. That being said, I'll hand it back to Michael.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to start off. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit what sort of sparked your idea to start the company that you've started?
That's a very good question. So the two organizations, the Clinton Health Access Initiative and the American Cancer Society, in mid-2017 came together to form an initiative that would increase access to life-saving drugs to treat cancer in 6 African nations. And this article was published and readily available. And my lovely wife, Tobechi, I've been happily married now for about 8 years with 3 kids, not to digress. But my lovely wife was able to find this article and shared it with me, and knowing fully well that I've been on the entrepreneurial path ever since before I even attended CASE in 2006. So I reviewed this article and sat down with my co-founder, Emmanuel Okorie, and we kind of brainstormed and thought about how we can add value to this initiative that was just an announcement. There was nothing concrete. We weren't aware of any requests for proposals or anything of that nature. So we discussed it, and within a couple of days, I made a call to the Clinton Health Access Initiative headquarters in Boston and spoke to the author of one of the authors of the article. And she was nice enough to take down my information. It was just a cold call, trying to see where we could help, at least in Nigeria. Nigeria happened to be one of the 6 countries involved. And she was nice enough to take down my information and pass it on to the team that were part of this program in Nigeria. And within a couple of months, this was in November of 2017, someone in Nigeria, the program manager who was assigned to this, to getting the work done in Nigeria, reached out to me via email, unknowingly aware of the fact that in parallel, my partner and I had decided to go to Nigeria to see what we can do to give back and help the country and do more in the healthcare space. So when he reached out, I responded by setting up a live meeting between himself and my partner. And when they sat down, he realized that not only were we, experienced professionals with both supply chain and finance experience, we would be able to provide a solution that would meet many of the needs that they had for this program. And by the needs, I'll tell you one thing about Nigeria. Nigeria is the most populated country in the continent of Africa. There are about 200 million people, and there are about a total, as of 2018, we had a total of 115,000 active cancer patients in the country. And many of these patients find it very difficult to afford the treatments that many of us here in developed countries and other parts of the world can afford to maintain our lifestyles and stay and extend our lifespan beyond what cancer tends to do to us. And we wanted to work with the partners involved and get a very good idea for how we could give back and do more in this sense in Nigeria. So Michael, over to you. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. And just for those of you who are just now joining, if you do have any questions, just feel free to tune in and ask your question. So another question.
Michael, let me just add, you can either sort of raise, you should be able to raise your hand if you're on Zoom, raise your hand in the chat, or even old school, you can sort of raise your real hand, or just put in there to let Michael know that you have a question. And for those on Facebook, please just put in the comments that you have a question for Gerald, and then Doug can chime in. So yeah, great. Sorry, back over to you, Michael.
Perfect. Gerald, another question for you. You talked a little bit about the solution that you guys came up with to fix the growing costs of oncology drugs in Nigeria. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you guys have implemented and maybe how important that solution is that you guys have come up with, and why is it so important?
Thank you. So post announcement and our engagement with the CHAI team in Nigeria, we decided to take a look at the problem. And the problem was cost, which I mentioned earlier. The other problem was access. So a lot of patients are not aware that they can receive cancer treatments, let alone afford it. So we worked with the Federal Ministry of Health, as well as the pharmaceutical drug manufacturers who were working with both CHAI and the American Cancer Society on this program, as well as other entities in the country, be it the banks. There are a couple of large banks we partnered with or we worked with, as well as payment processors or transaction processors. And in Nigeria, there's actually only one entity that processes interbank transactions. So the way we have we have a competitive landscape in other developed countries. In Nigeria, there's just one entity that does this. So we had to work with them at a very, very top to ensure that they understood what we're working on implementing. Now, what we did is we brought all these partners together. We put them, in so many cases, you had banks competing for the same amount of business, sitting at the same round table. And we designed a solution where we had all of these stakeholders provide some input and feedback on what this solution, the draft of the solution looked like. And the end result, our expected end result, was to achieve both costs savings, minimize the total number of middlemen in the drug supply chain. That was to come next. We knew a supply chain was to be developed. However, the existing process had a lot of middlemen and made it very expensive for patients. So we wanted to ensure we had the minimum amount of middlemen in the mix and the best solution that would allow all partners or all stakeholders involved in supply chain receive their payments within 1 or 2 business days of a patient making a purchase of their drugs. So this is something we worked on, and we're able to get this done in 2 years. Now, the initial plan was to get this solution up and running in 6 months. However, in working in a country of the nature in Nigeria, and with parties and entities who aren't necessarily experienced with, or who aren't privy to constant electricity or great infrastructure or great systems in place, systems of communication and process in place, we had to establish a process from scratch, design a supply chain from scratch, and put together a solution that just didn't exist prior to our getting to Nigeria. So this solution was launched in October of 2019 to 7 pilot hospitals. And in each of these hospitals, what we did is we had an employee of EMGE Resources. So our company, I'm sorry if I didn't mention this earlier, company name is EMGE Resources. We had an employee of EMGE Resources located at each of these hospitals, and this employee was responsible for ensuring that a patient who was diagnosed with cancer could easily come to the oncology pharmacy, understand how much the drugs cost, and understand that the drugs were the same price, no matter which of the 7 hospitals they visited for treatments, register as a patient in our system, pay for their medication, and either receive treatments, their chemotherapy treatments on the same day, or return at a later date for their chemotherapy treatments. So we're able to ensure this was done. We captured the patient's information. We captured their dosage information. We were responsible for the quality of drugs they paid for, as well as captured the revenue from the sale of the drugs. And within 1 or 2 business days, we've been able to disperse these payments to the respective stakeholders in the supply chain, including the drug manufacturer. So we've totally eliminated all the need for the special third parties or middlemen who add markups, various markups to these drugs once they arrive in the country. And it's saved over 50%. And this is a real value we can attribute to this program. We've saved over 50% of what patients typically have paid historically for these same drugs that we sell today.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you mentioned developing the solution, and you also mentioned earlier that you started this company with a partner. I was wondering, first of all, who is this partner, and how does his ability sort of complement yours and in creating this a successful business?
Thank you. So my business partner, Emmanuel Okorie, currently resides in Chicago, Illinois, so not far from you, Michael. And I myself reside in the Atlanta area. We've known each other for quite some time, about, I would say we're going on 8 or 9 years now. And he's spent, so one difference between the two of us, he spent majority of his career working in Nigeria, and I spent majority, if not all of my career working here in the States. We both now reside in the US. I've resided in the US for a couple of decades, and he's resided in the States for about less than 10 years. So we've had one thing in common. We've had this goal or need to go back and do something more to get our homeland, Nigeria, in better shape than it is today. And not just because we've observed, and this is public knowledge. You know, the electricity shortage, the healthcare challenges that have been experienced in the country. We know we knew we couldn't boil the ocean, so we kept on brainstorming and looking for a way to get in. We wanted to find a way or a low-hanging fruit that would allow us the ease of entry into the country and allow us to do more with less, and not have to pretty much make false promises or be unable to deliver on a promise. Now, his background again is in finance, and my background is in supply chain. So the unique requirement for this solution we designed was a finance component whereby every drug manufacturer was providing the drugs on credits, and we needed to ensure that they were confident in the fact that we could handle their products and secure their products and ensure that there was a cold chain system in place that couldn't be broken and it was foolproof, and would ensure that the patient received the drugs at the best possible quality, as well as the lowest price that we had designed based on our supply chain experience. So these are the differences between myself and Emmanuel that allowed us put together this solution for Nigeria.
Awesome. Thank you, Gerald. So we actually have a question here from Sarah Bartlett. It's for you. So how are you seeing the market respond to your guys' ability to partner with hospitals and provide such immediate results for patients?
That's a broad question. However, I'll be specific in my answer. The patients, every patient who's been made aware of our solution has been very excited that they have a way of procuring and receiving their treatments at half the cost, and can in turn extend the number of treatments they can receive over the course of the life of their cancer case. So many of the patients have been very, very much appreciative of this program. Now on the hospital side, it's been mixed, because on one case we have enabled many of their patients gain access to lower cost drugs. On the other side, we have disrupted some of their existing revenue models, because a number of these hospitals had separate agreements with some of these pharmaceutical manufacturers, independent agreements that didn't necessarily negotiate the best price for drugs. And some of these hospitals had markups on these drugs that provided a sort of a revenue generation, a point of revenue generation for each of these hospitals. So we have spent some time educating the hospitals on how this program will allow more patients coming to the market, and in turn in turn replace whatever revenues have been eroded by the lower cost of drugs. So depending on who you ask in the market, it's a varied response. However, one of the primary reasons we did this was to look out for the patient, to keep the patient first. And so far, they've been very happy with our solution.
Awesome. That's great. So Andrew, I noticed you have, Andrew Cohen, I noticed you have a question as well. If you would like to ask it, go ahead.
Sure. So what have been your challenges in dealing with the drug manufacturers, namely like consistent supply issues or patients on payment for the drugs?
That's a very good question. So one of the biggest challenges with the program itself has been funding. And I'll tell you, and funding from the standpoint of, in order to provide these drugs at the best quality to the patients, every hospital needs to have cold chain facilities in place. And many of these hospitals, when at the onset of the program, they had very little access, or they had no access to cold chain facilities. So what MG Resources did, being a startup, we actually made an investment utilizing our supply chain experience. We were able to work with cold chain equipment manufacturers. We procured those equipment and we donated them to many of these hospitals, at least the 7 pilot hospitals, to get the program off the ground. And it's not something we were requested to do. We felt that to ease the process and ensure that this was a smooth launch, we needed to provide some support for some of these hospitals that just had a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape in terms of getting approvals to procure some of these equipments. Now, on the drug manufacturer side, one of the challenges we had was they felt they didn't know as a startup, they just didn't know who MG Resources was. And one of these drug manufacturers is actually a very, very large US manufacturer. I would mention their name, except I didn't get authorization to do so here. They were very worried that they wouldn't get a return on their investment, and the drugs would be a high rate of drug damage or drug loss. So they wanted us to ensure that we had a foolproof system that mitigated drug losses throughout the supply chain. So we ensured we actually deployed a remote temperature and sensoring system at each of the hospitals to ensure that any one of our partners, including the Federal Ministry of Health, can log into our portal and take a look at the condition of the drugs at each of the hospitals over the life of this program. And that provided that level of trust that we were indeed doing what we promised we would do. So not only were we providing a supply chain, but we were maintaining the drugs and ensuring that they met the maximum shelf life allowable for each of them.
Awesome, Gerald, thank you. Here, I just got another question here from Crystal. Crystal, if you'd like to ask it, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I can go ahead and ask it.
Sure, yeah. So I was wondering, Gerald, how did you go about the process of recruiting and vetting trusted contacts for your supply chain?
So let me get this straight. You said trusted contacts?
I guess I could see an issue with the situation or a challenge would be how to like make sure everybody in your supply chain is someone you can trust, right? You mentioned removing the middlemen from the equation, and
Yes.
trust in
Yes.
is a part of that. So could you speak more about that?
Thank you very much. I appreciate you elaborating on the question. Yes. So our first step was understanding the existing supply chain. And when we realized how complex the existing supply chain was, we decided to go, to get a white sheet of paper and create a very simple supply chain. And the simplest supply chain you could design was the drug manufacturers. We're already working with both CHI and the American Cancer Society on this program. An extremely simple supply chain will be, the manufacturers got the drugs directly to the patients. So we started out from what's the best case scenario and what constraints did we have in the process that prevented us from achieving that best case scenario. So we started to design and iterate, and we realized that between the manufacturer and the actual end patients, we needed to have a distribution mechanism. And it would either be a distributor or a 3PL or a third-party distributor who had a presence throughout the country and had a lot of experience working with both the hospitals, the drug manufacturers, and already had some level of trust. And we were fortunate enough that we found a partner or distributor or logistics / distribution partner who could provide this service. Now, the advantage was this distributor already had a relationship with both drug manufacturers, so we didn't have to try to sell their skill set or sell them to the drug manufacturer. We were the new kids on the block, really, and we were the ones who had to prove our capability and prove ourselves to both the Ministry of Health, the drug manufacturer, and even this distributor who was going to be moving the drugs from the manufacturer through the country to the various nodes we had set up at the 7 locations. So this was one thing we were able to do early on, and it's actually was a fortunate and advantageous thing for us to get done at the onset of the program.
Thank you. That's really helpful to know. And I think that kind of connects into my second question, where I'm kind of curious as to how you and your partner were able to do this, or I'm not sure if you set this process up while you were in Nigeria or from offsite, and how are you able to monitor and continue running this process from offsite? And are there, what are the challenges associated with that? And are there any unexpected pros to this method of management?
That's another great question, and thank you very much again. Here's the interesting thing. One challenge before going into business in a country like Nigeria, that's still in a developing country, we knew success, one critical element of success was understanding how business is done in the country. And the way business is done in Nigeria, it is very difficult to implement a solution of this nature from a remote location. So my colleague and I, Emmanuel and I, spent from late 2017 till date, one of us has literally we've spent a lot of time on ground in Nigeria, meeting face-to-face with each of these stakeholders and building that trust, building that relationship with them, helping them understand that we're here to stay. We also spent some very good time recruiting talent in Nigeria. So we have an IT team. We have remote staff at each of the hospital locations, and each of these team members have very, very, have been tested and trusted from their backgrounds, and we've provided a lot of training to them, both on the logistics side, supply chain, and IT side. And we have done a lot to ensure that they can be our eyes and ears on the ground at each of these locations. So not only did we need to be present in Nigeria, we also needed to ensure that our staff at each of the locations were very well trained and very well, just a phone call or text away from us if anything were to come up. And this has made it very possible for us to be successful to this day.
Just to follow up on that, how important was it for you to build the trust that you both had backgrounds from Nigerian backgrounds, that you both, I think you said your partner actually came from Nigeria also. So how important was that?
Yes.
Building trust.
It is very important because, it is easy, or it was easier for us coming into the country, even though we both resided outside the country, because we had that background and we had that experience that we could show people and say, we lived here before, we grew up here, we understand your pain, we understand your challenges, and we also have families. So not only did we live there, but we both still have a large number of our family members. All of my siblings and their families, my parents, his parents, multiple siblings, they all reside in Nigeria. And it's helping our partners and our stakeholders understand that what we're doing is not only going to benefit, people we do not know, but it's also going to benefit our relatives, our friends, our family friends, and a network of people we also trust and have in Nigeria. So to directly answer your question, I believe we had some level of an advantage in that sense, that he spent over 20 years of his life working in Nigeria before relocating to the States. And I spent, about 13, 14 years of my life working in the States before we both went back to Nigeria to set this up. So that's a very good question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you guys so much Crystal and Andrew. Thank you so much for the questions. So Gerald, another question for you going off of that. So what would be your plans for the future of this company? Would they be to expand to other countries, or to just stay in Nigeria and focus your efforts there?
So I'll tell you, Michael, that's a good question, and we've put a lot of thought into it. We've gotten to this point as a result of a lot of the good work and relationships we've developed and built with many of our partners. And the initial pilot phase of the program, which had rolled out to 7 locations, is still operating in those 7 locations today. We had, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had very strong, concrete discussions with our partners to expand to all of the other public sector institutions in the country. So there are about 60 of these institutions in the country, and we were in the process of expanding and deploying tools and resources and teams to each of these locations when the COVID-19 pandemic put a hold on this. However, this is something we intend to do, for one. And secondly, the private sector in Nigeria is very ripe and very hungry for this solution as well, because many of them want to be able to provide treatments to their patients at significantly reduced and subsidized drug prices. Now, we did this for the oncology sector. There are other disease sectors that are also interested in our participation in their programs within the same hospitals where we play today. And these are other areas where we believe we can tailor our solution to become almost a software as a solution, whereby we have very minimal presence on site, and we provide the tools and resources to these hospitals to utilize their own resources to run and operate these programs and lower the cost of treatments of life-saving drugs for diseases that are very expensive to treat.
So you mentioned how COVID-19 has hindered your ability for expansion. Has it affected the connections you've already made with those 7 hospitals and the day-to-day operations, or has it just affected your plans for the future?
It has affected our day-to-day operations today, and I'll tell you, one of the biggest ones is many of these hospitals are now operating they're operating only essential services, and some of our teams have been relocated to other parts of the hospitals that are still active, while other, other areas in the hospital have been shut down. Transportation and how to get to work for some of our team members has been very difficult because the public transportation system has come to a halt in some parts of Nigeria. And thirdly, many of the banks in the country, or in fact that we deal with, the bank branches are closed. And in a country where majority of transactions are done by cash, we had to find ways to work around that. So when it comes to the limited amount of resources in the hospital and the system in place today, we have started piloting the ability for these hospitals to operate without an EMGE resources team member on site. And this will translate further into our software as a service solution. And this is currently in the works with 1 or 2 hospitals today, and COVID-19 has made this possible. The other thing when it comes to, and that also addresses the transportation issues with some of our staff members being able to get to work. The second thing is with the banks being shut down in many parts of the country, we have communicated to many of our patients that to minimize cash transactions at their upcoming or their subsequent appointments, so as to allow for mobile transactions or mobile only transactions or bank-to-bank transactions, which we also have we've enabled as part of our design. I didn't mention this earlier, but when we initially designed the solution, we initially had an element where it will be a cashless solution. However, when you think about the economy and the nature of transactions, majority of transactions are still being done by cash. And a lot of people of a certain generation are more comfortable transacting or paying for products and services in cash. So we had to leave that cash element in place. However, with the onset of COVID-19, we can easily transition to a cashless transaction solution, whereby we not only make it easier for the patients, but we also eliminate any forms of cash, unwanted cash exchanging hands and minimizing corruption. And the third aspect of that is we've done all we can to communicate to our staff members, our teams, to work remotely where possible and do things remotely where possible, so no one has to go in the offices. And we're here remotely in the States, but many of our team members can work remotely as well in Nigeria.
Right. Well, yeah, it sounds like you're making the necessary adjustments for sure. I see that Doug also has a question, so go ahead, Doug.
I'm just sharing from Lawrence on Facebook. He asked, as the co-founder of EMGE Resources, could you speak to the regulator landscape associated with the electrical utility industry in Nigeria, and how did you navigate it?
That's a great question, Doug. We going into Nigeria with this solution, not only did the hospitals not have, or many of the hospitals not have access to cold chain equipment, they didn't have access to consistent electricity as well. So when we designed our solution, we designed it such that all equipment provided, including the refrigerators for the drug storage, would be solar powered. So we worked with our equipment manufacturer to ensure that these solar powered devices were approved by the World Health Organization for medical use, and that these products be made available to the hospitals prior to the launch of our program. So that was one of the biggest constraints we had. Then to address the tools, our tool is web-based and can easily be accessed via any mobile device, via phone, tablets, laptops, desktops. So we make sure that our tool is easily accessible and can be utilized whenever a patient comes to pay for drugs or to make a transaction. That the fluidity and availability of the tool makes it possible such that when power goes out at the hospitals, our teams can easily utilize their phones or their mobile devices to continue the transactions and not have to worry about the power interruptions.
Great. Got it. Thanks, Gerald. So sorry about that. That question was actually from Lawrence Wright, who just joined us now. And he also has a second one. So I don't know, Lawrence, do you want to ask your second one, or would you like me to ask it? Okay, I'll just go ahead and ask it. He had a second question here. So his second question was, what services projects does EMGE Resources have planned in order to further expand electrification and electrical reliability in Nigeria for sub-Saharan Africa at large?
That's a good question, and Lawrence, I believe you have been on our website, and we had an initial plan to have a two-pronged approach to our solution in Nigeria. Electricity has been an issue, ever since prior to my childhood days in Nigeria till date. And there's an undersupply of electricity, and hence it further impacts productivity in a country. It makes it very difficult for investments in the country. It makes it challenging for manufacturers to operate at a cost competitively, as opposed to going to other countries with more reliable sources of electricity. So one of our goals going into Nigeria was to take a look at the power challenge and find ways to bring renewable energy solutions to the country. And getting into the health space happened to be our way, our initial launch, or our initial foray into Nigeria. We still have plans to tackle the renewable energy space. However, we've kind of put that on the back burner because in getting into the healthcare space, we realized that in order to go deep on the healthcare side, in order to remain and stay competitive, we had to go deep on the healthcare space and focus heavily on the healthcare space. And not that we're not considering what to do on the electricity, on the power or energy side, but we are trying to utilize the resources we have, the limited resources we have today, to focus on one thing at a time. And that's a very good question, Lawrence. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lawrence, and thanks, Gerald, for the reply. So, Ryan, I saw that you were raising your hand. Ryan Alexander, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, you can.
Yeah, hi, Gerald. My name's Ryan. I'm an economics and finance student here at CASE. Thank you very much for talking to us today. This is a bit more of a macro level question, so please feel free to tailor it to your own background and EMGE experiences. So once the dust settles with all of the coronavirus situation, how do you think supply chains might change as a result? Do you think firms will try to become less reliant on Chinese and Asian manufacturers? And do you think the response might differ based on region? So comparing Nigeria to the United States, for example.
That's a great question. And I'll take this back to my supply chain background. Many of us have come to learn of the very efficient supply chains that have been deployed in China and even other parts of the world, but China is very dominant in a lot of sectors, and I don't see it, and this is my personal view. I don't see it more as a movement away from China. What I envision is a significant investment in other parts of the world outside of China to optimize our supply chain in various sectors. And healthcare is one of them, but healthcare is broad because within healthcare, you have drugs, you have equipment, you have supplies, you have so many various aspects of healthcare. So I think there will be a big focus on investing heavily in more or supply chains that are more regional to specific parts of the world, as opposed to a centralized, low-cost country in the world. This is what I envision, and this response will vary depending on who you ask.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Gerald. Thank you, Ryan, for the question. We're going to now go to Michael Goldberg here. He's got a question on social entrepreneurship.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So Gerald, I'm curious if you consider yourself a social entrepreneur, because it's a topic of kind of growing interest even among our students at Case, companies that are making money but doing something else good for the world. Do you consider yourself a social entrepreneur?
Yes, we do. And this is something when we thought of this and we thought of why we have this passion to do what we do, there's a big social impact we're creating as a result of what we're doing. We are, and many of our partners, and the patients themselves are very, very impressed with what we've brought and what we've been able to contribute as a result of our engagement on this program. And the success has led to more being done utilizing our tools. For example, when we a few months ago, our CHI hosted a global conference in Nigeria where they came to take a look. All of their participants from various countries in Africa came to see what we were doing. And many of them were very excited about it and wanted to know how soon, we would deploy our solution to their respective countries. So there's a major social impact to what we're doing, and we believe it is saving lives, and it is doing a lot more good in the society than without it, than otherwise. And thank you for that question.
Great, thanks, Michael. So one last question here I have for you, Gerald. We talked on our phone conversation last week. You talked a little bit about your childhood, and I thought it was extremely interesting, just the way you grew up, the experiences you went through. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how those experiences prepared you to be successful in the workplace, and then prepared you to start a successful company.
Thank you. Yes, I mentioned earlier about some of my challenges growing up with electricity. We also had a shortage of water. Water wasn't readily available in the home. Many of us had to, on a daily basis, go and retrieve water in a bucket or a jerry can, in a wheelbarrow. It was very commonplace to go on these water trips, and they took anywhere from an hour to 2 hours, depending on how far away you had to commute to get drinking water for drinking water or water to cook with. And then we captured a lot of our other water for other use, like laundry and all that, from the rainfall. And it's very common to find families, even till today, homes in Nigeria have overhead tanks and storage tanks for water, because they either collect rain or they have a pump that pumps water out of the ground. But because there's an uncertainty on electricity availability, they have a lot of water stored to last days at a time in case power is out for days at a time, because that was very common growing up. One other thing we did, and this is something very unique as well, is we were fortunate enough to have farmed on weekends. So rather than go to the parks and go play soccer, which many of my friends did, we went to the farm on certain weekend days just to know what it is to grow your own food and cultivate your own food, because my parents wanted to prepare us for the future, an unknown future, wherein we may be in a situation where we had to grow our own food and have no access to commercially available food. So these are a few things. Now, how did this shape me and help me understand and think like an entrepreneur? I was very fortunate. I moved to the States roughly over 20 years ago and attended the Ohio State University prior to my master's degree at Case Western Reserve University. And I came across and met a lot of students from other parts of the world, other parts of the various parts of the US with various backgrounds that helped me understand that there is more to life than just, you know, getting a degree and sitting comfortably and earning, you know, an income and you know, raising a family, owning a home, just going through the very basic elements of life. And I always had that passion to think about what true challenges exist in specific parts of the world, and how does what I do on a daily basis solve and impact these challenges. So this you know, is one thing that has stayed with me throughout my career and led us to where we are today with EMGE Resources. So thank you very much for the question, Michael.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the answer, Gerald. That's very interesting. It just shows us, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of people in the United States grow up with a semi-privileged background. It's amazing to see that someone can, I mean, I guess the point is there are very few excuses that you can give that you can pose to say that this is why I'm not successful. It's amazing to see where you have came from. You've had to work very hard, and it's very impressive.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna turn it over to Michael, and he's gonna close things up.
Great. Well, Michael Volkening, thank you so much for moderating. I was texting Michael. I think he has a future as a talk show host or an Instagram influencer or podcaster. We have high hopes if you don't go to investment banking. Or maybe you can be an investment banker and a talk show host.
Perfect. I'll have to look into that.
Dual duty. Gerald, thank you so much for sharing your experience with our group today. I think a lot of the things that you're doing, that you've done in the US, that you're doing in international markets, the difference that you're making for folks in Nigeria, it's really inspiring. And it's a different perspective than a lot of the folks that we've had part of the series. So it's really great to connect. And we look forward at some point when we can all travel again to welcoming you back to campus and to Cleveland. And you really make our MEM program in particular proud, but the university as a whole proud. So it's great to reconnect with you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Great. Just a couple of announcements about future programs. So we're still actively putting on programs. This week, our next program is on Wednesday, also at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And the speaker will be Brian Hirschman, who's the general partner at JMI Equity. So Brian is an alum who's very active in the private equity space. It'll be very interesting to hear his perspective on the changing market given COVID-19. On Thursday, we have Mike Stahl, who's the director of the Entrepreneurship Center at California State University in San Bernardino. Mike's an alum of our Doctorate of Management program, and he's been a great friend and advisor to our new Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship. So we look forward to having Mike on Thursday. That's going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. And then Friday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to have a panel discussion. This is part of our Beyond Silicon Valley course that we relaunched to focus on supporting entrepreneurs in the global crisis. This is going to be actually on the role of universities. So we have Rudolf Dumatur and Alexis Komselis, who are in Austria and Greece, respectively. Danny Warshay, who runs the Entrepreneurship Center at Brown University, and Michael Strada, who's an alum of CASE, both undergrad and for the MBA, who runs the tech transfer program at the University of Virginia. That's going to take place at 9 a.m. Eastern. So we got a busy week. We have more next week as we sort of wind down our semester here. So it's great to see many of you, whether you joined via Zoom or on Facebook as part of our programming. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. So again, Michael, thank you, and Gerald, thank you, and thanks everybody for joining. And hopefully we'll see you at another program soon. So take care.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.